So we'll start the meeting at 2:06. This is Peter Mason. I am overseeing the ARPA initiative. I'll start off by saying this is a public meeting, and as such, individuals from out the public can watch. There is no public comment section. If somebody would like to ask a question, they would have to go through our website, and we have an ARPA email that people can send that on, and we will get back to that, and we will answer those questions. So with that being said, there are no minutes from, there are minutes, but Pam took off. I guess she went on a long vacation and she took the minutes with her. And so we will have to do both the minutes at our next meeting. So let's see where we're at. So we sent out the document regarding the related party. So I'm going to bring that up and we can look at it. I think we started this because we started talking about shared living and how valuable that is. So I know the department is looking at revamping shared living in terms of making it something that is coordinated and has certain rules to it, but trying to also make sure that it's individualized. So there's that piece of it where we can provide some input to it. But what I wanted to talk about is the issue of shared housing, which I think a lot of this is where some of this stuff comes from. And as the shared housing piece of it, that's where the related party guidelines would come in. So I'm going to start off in terms of the shared housing is that there are, let me make sure, in terms of ownership for a shared housing, sometimes it can be a single owner. Sometimes it's a collective of parents. And sometimes it's a limited liability corporation. So instead of having individual names on, they put it under an LLC. So those are the ownerships. And then out of that then comes this related party piece. And so I'm going to see if I can share my screen. See if I can find it. All right. Not that place. Hold on. All right, hold on. I'm not able to find that piece. Let me see. I do it a different way. Hold on. I have it. I just can't show it up on the screen right now. All right, let's see if that works. I'll get there. Hold on. Doesn't want to show up. Why aren't you showing up for me? Let's see. Maybe I can do it this way. You see that by any chance? No. All right.
I can see blue.
It's a pretty blue screen.
It's a pretty blue
blue
screen.
screen.
Okay. All right. Hold on. I'm gonna have to. Do it this way. No, that's not gonna work. Okay, I'm gonna have to go another way. Give me a sec. I thought I had it and I don't. So technical difficulties of this. Wasting time.
Mary Pat's minutes are gonna be easier than mine. That's not fair.
Yeah, I know. Isn't that horrible?
Sorry.
All right. Can you guys see that?
Yes. Yep.
All right, great. Okay, so we've hit this a number of times where family members want to own a house for their son or daughter, or they collectively do it together. And so we had to come up with these guidelines. And we know that this probably can be more, this could happen more often, so we came up with this. And the reason why this is here is that because they're using state funds, we have to make sure certain things happen. And when we look at a related party, that means somebody who is receiving DDS funds also has a relationship to the owner. So in this particular case, it could be the family purchases the house and their son or daughter is going to live there and they're going to get rent subsidy dollars. And as such, because the family, because the individual is related to the family, that comes under the related party guidelines. And we then have to make sure that the state funds are being used for the best interest of the individual. They're spent in legal and appropriate manner, and that no financial gain is by the owner. And when we look at financial gain, it's considered a conflict of interest if somebody is receiving a profit from the related party person. So if an individual is living in their family house and DDS is giving them funds and the going rent is $3,000 but it's only costing the individual, it's only costing the family $2,000 for the house. There's $1,000 that's the difference. And if we allow the family to charge whatever the going rate is on for that property, they would end up getting basically $1,000 a month off of the individual, which would also be state funds. So as such, we then have to look at that and say, okay, if you decide you want to use state funds, there can be no gain on that asset or make a profit. And so that's why these came into play. Now, if anybody wants to set up their own, buy their own house and have the individual pay for the house through their own benefits without state funds, that's up to them and they can do that. Now, whether that's fair and appropriate, that would be outside of DDS's jurisdiction. But, you know, that's why I want to make that distinction in terms of state, this is state funds. So if state funds are involved, that's where DDS comes involved in terms of the related party. So what's in the process is we have a number of documents that need to be done. And well, in
Peter,
order
can I
for,
interrupt real quick?
sure can.
Just a quick question. When you said about not being, if you're not going to use state funds and use the entitlements, the individual is going to use entitlements to pay. When you say state funds, are you also meaning they cannot receive DSS, say cash assistance or food stamps or anything like that? Or is it just DDS money they can't use?
This is the DDS.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know if DSS has a process for this, but DDS does.
Okay, got it.
Yep. Got it? So when we are looking at these houses, we have set up a process through what we call our DDS Ethics Committee. And the Ethics Committee is individuals, staff that work at DDS. There's representatives from the region. There's representatives from our legal department, but representatives from our operational center. And we review, I was on that committee for years, and we would review all these related party transactions, as we call them. And our job was to make sure that the state funds were used appropriately. We would look at the Office of Policy and Management cost standards. We would look at the individual's IP. We would look at all the costs for the house to determine whether this was legitimate or not. Most of the time, the ethics committee doesn't look at whether the family should buy the house or not. What it looks at is whether it's a related party. And if it is, at that point, then they would have to follow certain guidelines, and that's what would be reimbursed in terms of rent subsidy. So there's a whole bunch of documents that are coming in. I'm not going to read every one of them. But we would look at each one of these documents to make sure things were done appropriately. One of the things that we find often with the ethics committee is we don't get all these documents, and then we go back and forth in terms of, well, you're missing this, you're missing that. And one of the big ones that we always seem to not get is the lease agreement. The lease agreement is important because we need to know what the individual is going to be responsible for in terms of utilities and other costs associated with the house. Sometimes we find that the individual is responsible for everything. Even if something breaks, a major appliance breaks, and at that point we'll have questions to the owner and to the region to make sure that that's something that the individual is aware of. So we'll look at the individual's IP, and we check for any conflicts that may be in there. If there is, then we continue forward with this. We also look at whether this is in the best interest of the individual. And in 99.9% it is, but sometimes you get something that comes through that just doesn't look right and doesn't seem to be in the best interest of the individual. And I should say, with all this stuff, most of the people who put in, there's usually not an issue. Sometimes they don't realize the reasons why we do all this, and sometimes they don't realize about the whole related party and not having a profit. And that becomes an educational tool. But every now and then we'll get things that come across that it's just not, it's not good for the system. So for example, we had an issue, there was an issue where a house where the laundry, the washing machine and dryer were supplied as part of the lease. And then all of a sudden the owner decided to get rid of the washer and dryer, and then was requiring their individuals to go to the laundromat and do their laundry. And so it came to us in terms of ethics. And we said, well, it's part of the lease, so you need to be providing this. They then went to a system where they were charging, they put in coin-operated laundry facilities. And the issue there then became, we then would look at the profits of the laundry, and are they making money off of the machines? And so these things keep coming into play in terms of, you know, are they making a profit, and is it in the best interest of the individual? We then will look at the amount charged and compare that to make sure that there's it's reasonable and has fair rent for the same geographic location. We don't really care if the fair rent's below, but we do care if they're trying to charge more than what's around. And so we will be looking at that as well. There's also, when people start looking at, well, what is allowable in terms of expenses and stuff. So most often a family will they'll put in their mortgage amount and think that that's acceptable. And in the eyes of DDS, that's not acceptable, because DDS and the state will not pay for the principal of any mortgage. We'll pay for the interest and we'll pay for the depreciation of the property, but we won't pay for the mortgage. And so what happens is, if you have a 30-year mortgage, or if you have a house that's and it has a 30-year mortgage, usually then the house is then depreciated for 30 years, and then you determine what the annual amount was. So let's say the house is $300,000 and it's 30 years, that means $10,000 of interest would be allowed for the year, up for 30 years. And then the interest amount, we would then add on to that. We look at, were there any leasehold improvements that were done? And was that done through a loan? We would do the interest on that. If there's a lease, if it's lease payments, we would do, if you like to lease a piece of equipment, or if you leased a laundry machine or a washing machine and you leased it, that could be part of acceptable. The taxes would be acceptable, insurance, utilities, repair and maintenance. So all that stuff would be looked at. And then we would then come up with what we think is the rent, to make sure that there is no markup for profit or to pay off any principal of the loan. So where this sometimes gets dicey is a family member with all the good intentions, a house comes up across the street from them, and so they buy the house with the intention of their son or daughter to move into there, and then they'll provide the supports of being across the street. But then it comes to our committee and we say, okay, so you can charge $2,000 a month. And they'll say, but the person who owned the house before was renting it, it was $3,000. We want the $3,000. And we said, no, you'll be making money off of them. Well, that's just not fair. And maybe it's not, but if you want to rent that to somebody else and charge $3,000, you can, but if you're looking to take state dollars, then you can't make a profit off of that. We look at, all the expenditures, as I just said. One of the things that we also understand is that there has to be some way for a house or the owner to be able to capture money in order to pay for some major expenses. So let's say the furnace goes, and you don't have the money for that. We don't have a mechanism where we can say, oh, here's the money for it now or at the time it happens. But what we can do is allow for what we call a capital reserve and replacement fund. And so if they want to charge within the rent a certain amount of money that can go into this pot for future repairs, that's allowable. And then we have some conditions to that, in that it can't be the annual contribution can't be more than 1% of the total purchase price. So if you bought the house for 100,000, you couldn't charge the individuals more than $1,000 and a year. And then we also realized that we didn't want that fund to be growing and growing and growing. And so we capped it at 10% of the purchase price. So in that $100,000 example, they would be able to have a reserve in their account for $10,000. And we have safeguards in place to make sure that there's accounting of this. And we also have one in case the property is ever sold and nothing was ever bought with that account, that money should go back to those individuals because the owner no longer owns it. There are some special circumstances where that if the committee decides the individuals are moving from one house to the other, they can transfer that money, so it's there. But those we haven't seen that yet. I'm sure it will come up at some point, but those should be relatively rare. And once we do all that, and we're working with the region, what we find often is that sometimes things come to our ethics committee and we'll go, since we have regional representation, they'll say, we don't even know about this. This happens a lot sometimes with providers. They're looking to set up a community residential services site, and they're trying to do that on their own. And so we would go to the region and say, do you know about this? And oftentimes the region would then go back and talk to the provider, and the ethics committee would wait until get a response that the region's in agreement with it. Sometimes they are and sometimes they're not. And at that point, then we don't even look at it. So once it's all approved and all that, it then goes to the rent subsidy committee. Or the rent subsidy process, and then they would get the rent subsidy based on the rent subsidy process. So that is it in a nutshell. And I don't know if it's a lot of information. So if anybody has any questions, let me know.
Hi, it's Heather. I'm just clarifying that from America, sorry. I'm just clarifying that for a landlord that has no relationship whatsoever with the individuals renting from that landlord, that it's just fair market value and that's it, and they don't have to go through all this.
Right.
Only because it's related party. And again, if the related parties are able, to handle the rent without any rent subsidy, again, they would not have to go through this. So this is only if the related party of the individuals living there would be requesting rent subsidy for that. Just
Right.
clarifying. Okay.
Yep.
Thank
that's-
you.
Yep, that's it.
Hi, this is Peter from Mark. Can I get a little further clarification on that? So if they are not asking for rent subsidy, it doesn't have to go through ethics?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
At that point, it's the individual team that would be looking at the lease and does this work for the individual? We don't have to, the ethics committee doesn't have to look at what you're charging, hopefully the teams are looking at that. So, if Marrakesh wants to charge somebody $4,000 and the person gonna spend all their money just for that, that's the team's decision. That's not the ethics committee.
Peter, hi, Mary Pat DiCarlo from Kennedy Collective. You mentioned that not a lot of providers know about this. So how do we get that information out to them? How do we educate them, educate the case managers? Can we bring it to family forums so that they can all, start thinking about this? And, it can't be just anybody presenting it either, because I think, if I went to a parent group right now, just based on what I've heard and what little I know and what's on paper, it would be very hard for me to address a lot of the questions that would probably come up. So I don't know. I think that's just something that needs to go on the to-do list for the future, that, maybe a roadshow of some kind to get this information out to families, so that they know what their options are. The other thing that didn't come up in this, what about when a family says, well, I want to donate my home. I want my home to be used for this. Does it basically fall under all of the same guidelines?
Yes, because who owns it?
Okay, so the family then owns it.
Well, so let's say, I want to donate my house to Marrakesh.
Mhm.
So I donated them. So now Marrakesh owns that, and if they decide to go with the as a CLA, then it's gonna go under the rent, the room and
Yes.
board. And at that point, there is no mortgage depreciation interest because you own the house. And if you're then going to rent that to a family, then it would go under the ethics committee because you own it. And we would then have to look at, are you charging just at cost? You can't make money off of a house that was given to you.
Latte. Power. Just trying to get that.
Okay.
All right.
Mhm.
And I mean, the room and board, they do it that way, so.
Hi, it's Heather from Marrakesh. If you donate your home to Marrakesh, but a Kennedy Collective is renting it for their people from Marrakesh, then there's no related party.
There's no related party because it's your separate entities, right? Yep.
So the related, so that was a good question to start with, is the related party is a family member, but it's also an organization that is renting to its own people that they are charged with supporting.
Right. Yep. Yep. Like a lot of the CRSs, if the agency owns it, should be going to the ethics committee.
Mhm.
CLAs don't have to because they have its own process with the room and board with DSS. Because it's based on actual cost.
Can I throw out a question? What if we had an ICF that we wanted to no longer use as an ICF? Could we do that?
Could you do what?
Could could we rent that out as long as we're not, making a profit on it?
So that will get a little tricky because it depends on if another agency wants to use that as a CLA, for example.
Yeah. Okay,
They're gonna get into DSS. And DSS is gonna say, look, we spent 30 years paying for this. Why are we paying for this again? Even though they shouldn't, they will. Because one doesn't have anything to do with the other, but they will do that. In terms of DDS, if you rent that out to a individual that's not attached to DDS, or if that's not attached to the Kennedy Collective, so it's outside of that, then you can charge whatever you want, and there's not a related party.
okay. Might be a way to get out of the ICF. No. Hold on to the asset and go from there.
Peter, you have a question?
I do, and it may not be related to this bigger conversation. If it's not, you know, we can catch up with it later on. But I have an individual came into our program a while ago, and he came in with owning his own condo. So he has his own condo. He's continuing to make payments on it. It's not paid off, but we've always kind of had the question in the back of our minds. He's not going to be able to live there forever and ever. And at some point when he has to likely sell it, what happens to you know, the funding? If he's paid off the whole thing, does he keep the asset himself, or does he have to pay back the state in some manner?
I would think you talk to an attorney and see if you can get what he gets out of it into a trust before the state takes the money back. But that's just me.
Well, and I also would say that you don't want that individual to have that amount of money all at once, because that's going to affect all their benefits and stuff. So to put it into a trust makes even more sense in terms of that. I don't see where DDS would go back and say, take the funds from the individual. But I think having too many assets for the individual will be more of an issue. So that would probably need to get resolved before that. Anybody else? Yes. Anybody else have any questions? No? So keeping along with this, when you get into with shared housing, the other piece that comes into play is occupancy. And what I mean by that is who decides who lives there? And that may seem like a simple question, but we have had issues with this. So if two families get together and purchase the house, and it's a 3-bedroom house, they then want to find a third roommate. So now they then are deciding who's going to move in with them, which is their right. That's not an issue. The problem comes is that that individual may or may not be on the priority list of DDS. And so if they choose somebody who's not on the priority of DDS, then there's no responsibility for DDS to fund that person. And so that then gets into questions as to, you know, how are they going to do all this without having a third person in there? And then DDS will start saying, okay, well, here that we have, and well, those don't fit their mold that they're looking for. So then it gets into questions as to what role do you want DDS to play? If you want DDS just to give you the money and not say anything, that's probably not going to happen. So that piece of occupancy becomes an issue. Now, if you have gotten together with 3 individuals from the start and all of them receive DDS funds, then that's fine. You can move forward with that. But then occupancy comes into play when one of the individuals starts having an issue. And whether it's an old behavior that's come back, or whether it's a new behavior that is now disrupting the other 2, now you need to find out in terms of this occupancy, who decides who stays and who goes. And there needs to be some kind of a mediation process to that. And so oftentimes people look to DDS to be the mediator. And that is not a comfortable role for DDS. And it always ends up that DDS is the bad guy, because it never plays out the way the way that the families want it to, because it would be our belief that we need to figure out how to support the individual in that home, and how do we do that versus moving that person out and then finding somebody else to replace them. So that piece of occupancy becomes a big issue in terms of the shared housing part to this. And then that I also put down the mediation piece of how that gets mediated is critical in terms of, identifying who the mediator is going to be outside of DDS. I think if you have that spelled out, it would go better for the families than it would if DDS is involved. Because if DDS has no say on what that happens, fine. But if you're asking for DDS to make some decisions, then you're bringing DDS in to do something that you're probably not going to agree with.
Peter,
Yeah.
this is Heather from Marrakesh. So we experience this all different ways. And just for, illustrative, our group homes have been easy breezy because it's something, most of the time we own them or we have a landlord, but we're in control, and people choose who they want to live with. And, there's also some times where that doesn't work out. But we've noticed actually 2 times this year where external landlord said, I will renew with these 2 people, but not this 3rd one, whether it's because their house was destroyed or because the guardian of the 3rd one has been really not nice to the landlord or whatever. So we are experiencing that with just typical landlords, not only family landlords. So we've really had a hard time. And, it is definitely easier when we have the control and we could do the mediation. And when you're opening it up to external landlords or families, it does get a lot more complicated. However, our big goal is for people to live in their own places with their own leases and not homes that we own. But we're in 2 cases now that the landlords in the community are, asking us to fix what was broken, and that's not in anyone's budget, and that's just a loss of money. So, so we're really experiencing that really bad this year. And it might be because the housing market, people are thinking, well, now I can rent this home to other people that I don't have to go through, people with disabilities or people that might have an issue. So it's kind of working against us this year. And I just think it's something that we should think about and how we're dealing with that, because it's not just the maybe families who own the homes, but it's also landlords, and it's also families who interact with landlords or the people living there.
Yeah, and this is Peter Mason. And when you, if it's a 3rd party that's unrelated, then DDS has no say in that. It's then between the the parties themselves. So even if a family wanted to rent a house, and from somebody outside who's a third party has no relation to them, if they decide that they don't want individual A, DDS has no say to go back to that landlord and say, you have to do this. Whereas if the family owns it and they're looking for DDS to fill that spot, then DDS all of a sudden has a say in terms of, well, you shouldn't leave this person or what this person should stay. So it becomes, it's an issue that you don't hit. When you hit it, it's really bad. If you don't hit it, it's great, but if you do hit it, it can be a real bad situation. So the other piece to this also we find is the actual lease itself. And oftentimes when it is with families, they feel that they don't need a formal agreement. They've shaken hands, they own the house, this is great, but that's not true. This stuff needs to be formalized. Whether it's somebody damages their room or they damage the hallway, who's going to be responsible for that? When the roof is at 29 years and one family member wants to change the roof now and the other one says, no, we can wait a couple of years, that becomes an issue. So all this stuff starts coming into play. And so when we look at it from the ethics committee, our first thing is, where's the lease? And sometimes we have to wait because they have to create the lease that they haven't put it down before. Now they have to put it down. So it is something that needs to be looked at. Who's paying, who pays for what? We sometimes will get into arguments where it will say utilities and be very vague about it. And that then also includes shoveling the driveway from the snow and other items that may not have been thought of, but then is being creatively looked as the utilities. So it is something that we also look at. And then the last thing I have has to do with the staffing piece. As we look into these, the staffing becomes it can be something that seems quite easy and not necessarily is. So for example, in these type of situations, individuals are receiving funding for their individual. And so oftentimes it's funding for individualized home supports. So they're getting money for them to provide, for somebody to provide that individual one-on-one supports for so many hours. And oftentimes families look at it, let's just pull the resources together. And so now we can have one staff on for 8 hours and everything be good. The problem with that is the rules and regulations for individualized home support is that staff has to be attached to a person. And so if one person's providing supports to 3 individuals, how do you split that up? And it can become dicey. Now, one of the things that DDS has done is we have moved to shared IHS services. So we've made it a little bit easier in terms of that, and so that can then be done. And we have it for a 1 to 2 and a 1 to 3. And so that we've made it a little bit easier in terms of that. But previous to that, sharing staff would have been very difficult because it would have been, all right, this staff is from 3 to 5 is with this individual, from 5 to 7 is this individual, and it would have become more of a paperwork nightmare trying to track all that stuff. So, but it's still individualized funding, and so people need to realize that it's still, the money is attached to the individual. It's not attached to the house in a shared housing type of situation. You get into then with the situation is how do you schedule the staff and how that's decided. So if you pool everybody together and it comes out to that you can afford, I'll use 40 hours for the week. You now have to decide how that's going to be used. And if you do it all in a shared setting, which you could, it would leave probably very little individualized individualized supports. And then you start getting into, well, is it really an IHS if they're not getting any individualized supports? And so then we have to look at it that way. So, you know, how you separate out and how you work through that becomes really important. See, okay. There's also how does it, if the individuals need 60 hours and they only have enough for 40 hours, there's a 20-hour gap. So now that means families, it will be up to the families to decide how they're going to provide those supports. And do they do that on a rotating basis, on a scheduled basis? What happens if someone gets sick? Who does this? I mean, it becomes how they set that up, all needs to get it to talked about in advance to make sure that you have all this covered and no surprises as it goes forward. Mary Pat.
Yeah, we've had families in the past that have said, okay, if we're a group of parents, we're gonna buy a house, but we want you to manage everything. We want Kennedy Collective to manage everything. Has that been done where then pretty much the family steps out of it? Yes, they're the landlord, but that's about it. You know, the agency does the scheduling and all of that. And make
Yeah.
sure that there's coverage.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've had providers do that. And Heather's nodding her head as if you guys do it. I think, and I'll let her talk, but I think as you guys are the provider, all that documentation then falls on to you. Once again, since we've made the shared IHS, it's a little bit easier, but previous to that, it would have been more difficult. And then you need to decide, is this a CRS? Is this a, you know, what is it after all this? And if it goes from families doing it to the provider, and now the provider thinks, well, this is more CRS, and now there's additional funds, which has to go to our Pratt team, and whether they'll then agree to that, that all comes into play as well. And they may or may not, depending on the individuals. I guess the administrative piece would need to get paid through the hourly rate that you're charging for the IHS.
Well, and that, yeah, so my question to Heather would be, is it fiscally possible? Or is it really tight to do that?
Well, right now in shared living, it's not fiscally possible, but we're doing it for 3 adults, 3 programs, because none of the minimum wage rates went up in the shared living rates, but we increased the rates of the people providing the IHS services in those sites. And for some reason, DDS can't get their arms around it, just increasing the rate so we could pay our staff the same we pay in all the other sites. If anything, actually reading this this report, this Deloitte report is they're paying staff more when they're working outside of group homes and facilities. And we're doing it wrong right now. I'm sure we're going to fix it, but we're not doing that right now. So yeah, so right now we're losing money in our shared living programs in which families own. Yeah, we don't, it's not good yet, but I think it will be eventually, I hope.
Well, and again, then that makes it a hard sell, so it's all great in theory, but then when a family, approaches an agency and said, hey, listen, we really want to do this. We got the house, we got this, we got that. I'm like, no, we will we'll lose our shirts on this.
It's
So-
Heather from Marrakesh. And a CRS at work, we've done that with a couple CRSs. And just from our experience, because we've done it a few times, that most of the times the families that want to own the home also want to be part of the staffing selection and the schedules and the day-to-day opportunities. And sometimes that gets, you have a conflict. And so what we do all the time is when we're starting a new program, we're always like, we don't own it. That's great. We don't own the facility. We don't own the employees. And so if they want to go to another agency or actually take over and run it themselves, that's great. So sometimes it's just a starting, they need like an agency to kind of help them get it together. And then sometimes they want to actually say, hey, we can do this, but we will, maybe when we get older, we'll need an agency for, on call or staffing. So as long as it's fluid, I mean, people's lives are fluid, and as long as you could figure it out that way. But in a CRS, it does work out financially for us.
You're almost, when you're talking about that, you're almost looking at, is there an administrative fee that can be charged to the agency? So that you don't hire the staff, you don't hire the staff, they're not yours at all, but you do all the scheduling and all the administrative functions. So almost as if there's a amount that could be charged, that could be an allowable cost. So you're just the administrator, and maybe you're there and you're the backup agency that provides the staffing support if need be. And at that point, when they come in, they would then get charged, you charge the rate of the supports. So that may be something to advocate for.
Advocate with DDS for that.
Yes, yep. Remember, I'm a retiree, so what do I know?
Okay, never mind.
And I'll just finish this up. The last issue has to do with the supervision of the individuals, as we were just talking, if you're a shared housing and is 3 families, who's responsible for the supervision? Is it a collective? Is one of the parents being designated as, okay, you're the supervisor, and you have responsibility for the hiring and the firing? And so how that works. And then oftentimes, a lot of times you'll see parents will do that. They'll do a limited liability corporation in order to have the corporation be the one that does all that stuff. Because then you're talking about benefits and workers' comp, unemployment, all that kind of stuff gets put into that as well. So I kind of just wanted to throw out some of those ideas, because I know we talked about it, and just to see what people's thoughts are in terms of that, and where do we go from here in terms in that. Was this helpful? Did it sound right? Just making sure there's comments.
It's Heather from Marrakesh. Definitely housing is a big part of this whole exercise in the future. And I don't think we're there yet. I know we're not there yet. And it, is one of the first requests that I asked for the meeting is to like make sure that the people are hooked up with rent subsidy or a voucher. It doesn't even have to be DDS money, a voucher, and, work with your partner at the Department of Housing and get vouchers for people that are leaving group homes and going out into the community. Cause I know that's family's greatest fear is that where are they going to live if it
Mhm.
doesn't work? And so if they have their own voucher, they have that for life. They don't have to get the permission again. They just have safe, affordable housing forever. Oh, Mary, Pat, before you drop off, I do want to point out on page 32 of the Deloitte plan that it does reference transitioning people out of ICF IIDs according to our 5-year plan. So I was so happy to see that in there.
Okay.
Because I think that's not working either.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
And I know when we
Okay.
discussed this specific, moving on program for residential that we kept saying it has nothing to do with ICFs, it has nothing to do with ICFs, but even Deloitte saw that it had something to do with ICFs because they did put it in the plan. So
I will take a look.
yes, it's on page 32. All right, I'll take over the minutes. Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.
See you guys next time.
Okay.
Bye.
Lori, you're
I-
very quiet.
I'm taking this all in, Peter. I think Mary Pat's idea of family forums with all this information to provide to families with somebody who knows all the ins and outs is an excellent idea, because I just don't think families realize, I mean, I'm trying to wrap my head around all this information myself. And there's a lot to consider. And it's just not as easy as let's buy our child a house and pull his friends together for life when they don't have priority status. And, it's really challenging. And yet I understand as a family member and with aging parents, and they have children who have friends for years and years, and the parents have gone through everything together in their community. So I understand why they want to do that. You marry up with these other parents in your community, but at the same time, logistically, it doesn't always work, with a level of, not just the level of need, but more the priority status and the funding. And so I think it would be really helpful to have parent forums around this whole housing option, because individuals have approached me as well. And we haven't gone to the ethics committee, but there's just so many pieces to it that I think that firsthand to have that information would be very, very helpful. Even case managers, I don't even think they can explain it very well either. It's usually taken to the ethics committee. So if this is something that can be available to parents as a workshop or a family forum, I think that would be really, really helpful, because this comes up often.
Okay, I can bring that back. I think a lot of times it sounds simpler than it actually is.
I
Yeah,
know.
we'll buy a house and we'll all live together. You know, we used to do that
And
in college too. And then
Yeah.
the roommate's not doing what you thought the roommate was supposed to do. And, you know,
Right. And I do understand it as a parent. Parents think that, okay, we're going to provide a lifetime residence for our child, and we never have to worry at least about the home itself. But it really isn't that easy. Just having a daughter in a CRS roommates come in, roommates come out. I mean, it's tricky. You know, I found a rental in West Hartford for my daughter CRS. So we had found the rental. And then we hired the agency to staff it. But our relationship is with the landlord. You know, we, as part of the CRS, we all split utilities, and even that is a little tricky, but we handle that piece. But yeah, I just feel that parents need to have a better understanding of all the components that go into it, and housing is just one piece. And I think families feel that when they purchase a house, that's the big expense, and that's
Right.
not the big expense. You know, that's the rather small expense. You know, the big expense is a staffing. So,
Yeah, I mean, when you look at it and people see you buy a house, it's 500,000, that's a lot of money. But when you start putting the staffing costs in on a year-to-year basis, you know,
right.
that it's slowly, that amount of money
$400,000.
becomes very smaller. It's like, yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. On a side note, there was a forum last night about the ARPA initiatives. And Velardo did a wonderful, wonderful job. A lot of very good questions. Yeah, I thought it was great.
Great,
I thought they were
good. All right, anybody else have any questions? Otherwise, I'll go to an update of where we're at right now.
Peter, this is Tammy Venegay from DDS.
Tammy.
I just want to, I mean, we talked about shared supports and individual home supports. One of the things that comes up is people share support and then they want to move out because something's not working out. They don't have enough money to move out because some of their money is tied into shared supports. And then there's not enough supports in the home and not enough money to leave. That does not happen in a CLA or a CRS because they have their whole entire amount. There's no sharing services. There's no sharing budgets, so to speak. So I think that is something we just need to keep in mind. I think sharing supports is wonderful, and I think it works out well when it can be done, but people need to know that if their budget is built on being able to support two people and they want to now finally go move into their own apartment, they may not have enough money to go do that because some of their money is tied into having another individual with them. So it's just something I think we fail to mention. We say, oh, you can save money if you share supports. Absolutely, you can. But then that also means you're stuck with always sharing your supports. And so if you're with a roommate and you're sharing supports and your roommate wants to go to a concert and you want to stay home and do an art project, who wins?
Right, right, right.
So that's just something to keep in mind.
Good point, thank you. Okay, let me go to our update. Okay. So as of right now, we have 26 agencies that have submitted interest in moving in phase one. Of those 26, 11 said they're definitely going to put a plan in. We have yet to see a plan yet. We had one plan, but that's getting revised. So we're still waiting to see others that are coming in. We have Deloitte Consulting. They're going to be doing their first office hours tomorrow for those agencies that have said that they're interested. So we'll be looking forward to see what comes out of that. I know Deloitte's going to do a presentation to begin with and then open it up for questions. So looking forward to see what that says. For those that weren't here, Peter alluded that there's the, we had sent out the states analysis by Deloitte. They will be coming to our next meeting on, I think, the 16th. And so they'll be going through that report. I wanted to make sure you had it in advance now, so I can tell you to make sure you read through it. So when they do come, you have all your questions for them. So they should be here on the 16th. some of the things that I'll give you some of the highlights that I found were interesting is there was a number of states have non-reoccurring apartment setup expenses that are able to be allowable under the waiver. So we're looking into that. These include such things as household furnishing, security deposits, utility setup fees. So we're trying to see how do we do that on our end to hopefully help move people, help ease the way for people moving into apartments. So that's a good thing for us to have seen. We noticed that Maine hired certified employment specialists and they're embedded in the state's job center. And that may be something that we need to see if that's something that we can do here. And, you know, I don't know how many providers actually utilize the job center, but even if they do, if we have somebody who's embedded right there, maybe they can get some more advance notice of openings that could help our individuals. Benefits planning was a big piece to this, and they paid for benefits planning. We have ours done through BRS. We're now looking at how do we expand that? So do we hire somebody on DDS for that, or do we assist BRS to hire a specialist that just deals with people with ID? So it's something that we want to take a look at. Missouri has established a couple of value-based payments. So what they found is they weren't getting enough data in terms of people who were in their own jobs through the provider, that the data wasn't that great. And so one of the things that they set up was that they pay a provider if they submit the quarterly report. So it then becomes voluntary on the provider's part. And if so, then they'll then pay them a certain amount in order to make sure that that gets submitted. That may be something we want to look at too, because we want to make sure that we have the data of how many people are working, what are they getting paid. There's a lot of data we could use, which would be very valuable. The other thing that Missouri looked at had to do with individuals who transitioned to remote supports, and that if there was any savings, there was a shared savings piece to this, so that the provider could receive 15% of the savings to the state. So that's a pretty good amount of money, and there's no catch to it. It's an outcome payment that you would get. So one of the things we're looking at is value-based payments. The other thing they looked at in terms of, this is Missouri again, in terms of remote supports, was to do it on a small basis, just to get it started. And so they were doing stuff with families that they would allow families to use remote supports on a couple hours whether that's a week or a day, which would then help the family in terms of respite time, because now you have the remote supports that would be there to assist the individual, and then determining who the backup, if the family's the backup, they may not be able to leave, but then they can do other stuff while they're in the house. Or, you know, do they have a provider that they set up so that the provider provides the backup? It was just something just to get remote supports going and getting people to know what it is. One of the things I was thinking is do we set up some kind of a grant opportunity where we would allow CLA, CRS providers to do the same thing for people they support in the CLAs and pay that separately. And, you know, just to start getting people used to remote supports and having independence and still having the supervision or the oversight there. So those are some of the major things I saw. As you go through that, you know, we'll be looking for people's opinions. And, you know, if there's stuff that we can mirror or duplicate, you know, that's definitely the stuff that we're looking for. Anybody have any questions on that? Going on, we have, so far we've received somewhere between 17 and 1,800 surveys from families, from the individual and family survey out of 9,200. So we're close to 20%, which for a survey, that's pretty high. So we're pretty excited about that. We'll be looking at towards the end of next week or the beginning of the next after that to start seeing some analysis of the survey, and we'll be sharing that with the committees and with our stakeholders. Their provider surveys was done by Deloitte. We had 38 responses, so they'll be gathering that and coming up with recommendations from that. Deloitte also had input sessions from stakeholders. So they had one for family that was targeted just for day, another one for res. Providers had one for day and one for res. And then we had case managers, or not case manager, DDS staff, mostly case managers, but DDS staff, and then self-advocates also. And out of that, they came up with real broad themes, and there's a report that's coming out that'll be much more detailed, but I just figured I'd give you the broad details. The barrier being accessible transportation, and the shortage of that and how that affects individuals trying to find employment. One of the things that we're looking at is sending out a whether it's an RFP or whatever, for a company that would be able to work with providers and other stakeholders in terms of transportation routes and availability. And an individual who needs to go from A to Z would go on there and put where they want to go. And is there a route or a provider that comes close to that may be able to pick that individual up and drop them off, and see if that we can try to work on it on a macro way that would help individuals, because we have so many providers sending people all over the place. If we can try to figure out where they are, it would almost be like an Uber or a Lyft type deal. You say, okay, I need to go from here to here. Well, they would then call the provider and say, hey, look, we've got this person, you know, can you do that? Obviously, there'd be a cost to that, we understand, but trying to solve it that way as well. So we're investigating that. We did find that our DCF has something similar to that we may be able to tap into, which then we could tap into a lot sooner than if we did an RFP. So one of the things we're looking at. Affordable housing was another of the main themes. And looking at, you know, a supply of accessible housing. One of the things we've seen has helped has been our supportive housing model, which is usually in low income housing projects. And what we're going to be looking at is submitting an RFP somewhere over the next couple of weeks, where we're going to look at non-project based supportive housing. So in what we've been doing up until this point is we've been working with developers who are building apartment complex and starting right from the beginning. We're now trying to see if we have non-project based, so we have an existing complex there, can providers work with that developer to set up something in those complexes? If we can do that, then we don't have to have that 2-3 year lag of building the thing that they're already built, and maybe we can get more people involved in that now. There was a lot regarding transition from schools. So we're looking at how we can do better in terms of our transition from schools. And then the whole workforce recruitment and retention was a big issue too. So those are like the broad themes. And once again, I said, we'll be getting, we have the draft now, so we'll be looking at the draft. Once that goes through the review on our end, we'll then be sharing that with all the stakeholders as well. Couple more things. We have the 7 videos that we're going to be developing. And so right now our communication consultant McDowell is going to be working with their videographer. They'll be meeting with a couple providers tomorrow to identify individuals in a remote support setting, supportive housing setting, community is the a CCH, and you doing an actual video of people actually in these sites, and then providing information so people can actually see it, and they would be able to share that. So if you want to see what supportive housing here's what we're looking at. So we'll have that available by the beginning of next month that we can start sharing. I talked about the value-based payments. That's another big piece that's going to be coming out of Deloitte. They've now they've been doing their analysis. They've looked at more states than just the 5 states that we had. They're going, well, once we get that report, then we'll share what that would look like. And then a couple of other things in terms of our ARPA items are the rewarding work contract, which is for individuals who self-direct their own resources. We're redesigning that website to allow individuals and staff to put down job opportunities in their job descriptions, so that they'll be able to match it, where before it was just like a housing thing. This is going to be more detailed, more sophisticated, and this is estimated to start from March 1st. So hopefully that will help some of our self-determined individuals. We have
Heather,
18.
could you say that again? I missed that for the minutes.
So it's called it's an employment network. That's we have a contract with Rewarding Work to develop a website that allows individuals who self-direct to post their job description and their hours, and it allows individual staff or individuals who want to be staff to post their job descriptions, and then it will match it and say, if you need somebody from 10 to 2 on Tuesday and these criteria, these are the resumes that will work for you. So, thank you.
Peter, this is Tammy from DDS. Are we holding them accountable for, are we asking for measurements of how many people actually get hired?
Yes.
The biggest issue we hear about Rewarding Work is families contact all these people that their resumes are on there and then never end up being able to hire anybody. So how do we think this is going to help in any way? Just because I can put a job on there, which I believe I already can. I can advertise on the current Rewarding Work. It just seems to be a site. They don't Rewarding Work. There's nobody at Rewarding Work active trying to make pairings. The first question typically asked of a person is, how much are you paying? You answer the question, they say, no, thank you. So
yeah,
there's not actually teaming coming, like people are not finding Rewarding Work very helpful because they're not really being, they don't really hire from there. So what accountability do we have for Rewarding Work this time?
So the website that you're talking about is something that we were paying for like $9,000 a year. It was very minimal and not very interactive. They're setting up stuff that the website that they've set up in Massachusetts and New Hampshire, which is much more sophisticated. And as part of that, We have, we're working with them. They have outcome measures that we're looking at that they need to supply with us in terms of matching and hiring. And then also as part of the contract, they also need to be recruiting. So they'll be recruiting people to be on the site as well. So there's more pieces that they're doing. Will it work? I'm hoping it will. I think it's going to be much better than what we have. We're still talking a workforce crisis. So I mean, that's still, we have to measure it in that way as well. But this is supposed to be much more interactive and hopefully more will assist families better. But there is also an outcome piece to this as well. Carly?
Hi there. There is a site on Facebook that's Connecticut CPA Job Connection. And it's similar to the Rewarding Work one, and people post, that they're looking for people, and then they just message you and you can try to go through there. It's there. I don't know how well it works. Some of Carly's friends have used it on various it's not always successful, let's put it that way, but it is out there, and it's been around for, I don't know, I would say about 6 months that I'm aware of. And by the way, it's Kathy Bobensky, Carly's mom.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I haven't heard that, so thanks for letting us know. What's the name of it?
It's called Connecticut. It's on Facebook. It's CT, obviously Connecticut, PCA Job Connection. And there's 363 members at this point in time.
Okay, thanks for letting me know. I didn't know that.
Yep.
Couple more things and then we're almost done because I got 3 minutes. So we have AT assistive technology grants that we have issued. One is for individuals and one is for providers. And that is for individuals who are looking to increase the use of assistive technology. These grants will assist them with that. If individuals don't know what they need, they can get money for an assessment that will then help them to determine what they could use. We are looking at setting up a third one that will be for day programs to help assist in terms of individuals who could use assistive technology in employment settings. So we've got that set up. We're going to be doing an assistive technology conference in June. And we'll have a summer camp later on in July. So the AT conference will have speakers as well as vendors appear. And then the summer camp will be to help actually show the equipment in use. So we'll have it at Camp Hemlocks. No, sorry, Camp Harkness. And the idea is one of them, we may take one of the cabins and make it a smart house so that people can see that. And that's it. That's what we're doing. Anybody else have any questions? Okay, if not, your assignment then is to read the state's analysis and bring your comments, suggestions, recommendations on the 16th with you, and we'll go over it then. All right. All right, great. Thanks, everybody.